Morning, everyone. Welcome to our Mastering Workers' Comp with Real Case Studies. This is a great one to learn to learn more about workers' comp from the actual case studies. My name is Zane Agostini. I'm CEO of CID Insurance Programs, and I want to introduce Lexi Johnson, who's our new business work comp underwriter, and Darby Fisher, who's our work comp renewal underwriter. And of course, we have Jacob Cole, who's our marketing coordinator and who makes all of this work beautifully. So let's take a look at what we want to get started with today. The logistics, we want to get it out of the way first. Everyone will be muted. You'll be able to hear but not speak. But your voice is important to us, so please pose your questions in the chat room at any time throughout the webinar, and we will stop and answer them for you. And then we have a short survey that will appear at the end of the webinar, and we really would appreciate your feedback so that we can continue to provide valuable webinars that are helpful. Okay, what will be our objectives today? We want to sharpen your knowledge of workers' comp, and the best way to do that is to do that through case studies. So those case studies will actually help you understand in a real situation that the areas of workers' comp that you need to have a better understanding in order to sell policies, and especially larger premium policies to your clients. And then how do we compete in the workers' comp arena? That you need to be knowledgeable. So I think this webinar will be helpful to you for that. So I want to introduce our workers' comp department. I've already introduced Lexi and Darby, but you can see that they run the department with support staff, and they have a wide array of classes of business that they can write workers' comp for you. This is a very, very small list. There is a much greater list that Jacob will be sending you after the webinar, so that you can use that as a cheat sheet to go in and check to see whether we can write something for you or not. Without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Lexi, who's going to talk about new business quotes.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for joining. I wanted to start off with new business quotes, how to get a quote fast, and the 5 basic pieces of information needed for me to underwrite and also quote a risk for you in a timely manner. So it is very important when you're submitting a risk to know what you're submitting. You have to have a good understanding of the business. You know, what are their operations? What type of employees do they have? What are the duties of each employee? Have they had prior coverage? And if not, do they have experience in the industry? You want to ask these questions so that ultimately when you send the submission over to us, we can quote it based off of the correct information. So these are just 5 basic points of information, and these are on the Acord application that I will go over in further detail also later. So first, entity name and insured contact information. So I do need to know the name insured and what type of entity they are. Are they a corporation, a LLC, a partnership? And then the name insured and the entity, it should match how they're filed with the state. So that's very important, because sometimes I do receive Acord apps that say they're an individual, but then I come to find out they're filed with the state under a corporation, and it's just a lot of work to change it once we bind coverage. So submitting the correct information is essential. Most of the time this is overlooked, but I do need the name insured contact information. So that includes the name, their first and last name, phone number, and also email address. And that's just because nowadays everything's becoming electronic copies instead of going through the physical mail. So carriers request this information to be on file. And then secondly, the FEIN number, which is the Federal Employer Identification Number. We absolutely need this to quote. This is how all our carriers track their submissions. So this is how we can tell if a market is blocked or already submitted by an agent. And third, a detailed description of operations. So this kind of goes what I was mentioning earlier. You have to know what the businesses or the services being offered are. Make sure you get a clear description of what the employees are doing, and make sure to just ask your insured questions about the risk. So a quick example I wanted to cover, I've received Accords in the past that just say contractor under description, but I need details on that. Are they general? Are they artisan? What type of work are they performing? Is it painting? Are they electrician? And this also ties into the payroll classification because you want to properly classify the employees and not overcharge them by placing an employee in a wrong classification. So going into our fourth point, payroll classification, how are the employees being classified? You would list the number of employees, full-time versus part-time, and then provide their estimated annual payroll per class code. If you have any questions on classifications, you can always reach out to me. Also, a really good source for trying to figure out how to classify an employee is actually the Work Comp Rating Bureau, and you can send them an email, and they respond same day. So you can also search their duties on the Rating Bureau and see what class description fits them best. So I use that tool a lot. And then if they have prior coverage, I do need current valued loss history. We just need to know their claims history or if they have 0 claims. And then lastly, a supplemental application. This might be requested. It just depends on the operations. Most of the time, the carrier will require this on larger risks, maybe over $10,000 in premium or your higher risks. Most of the contractor submissions that we get, a supplemental is required. So we actually, you can always email me if you need a blank supplemental application or a blank Accord form, and I can send those over to you. And lastly, it is also very helpful if you're able to provide a target premium so I know what to aim for to secure the bind, because ultimately our goal is to get you the best pricing. So if you can just provide as much information as possible, that would be great. The next slide, I'm going to show you an example of a completed Accord application. So this is just the standard Accord 130 app, and this is a business I created, but these are key factors that have to be completed on the Accord app. So everything that is highlighted is information I need completed. So name insured. In this case, you can see it's a sole proprietor, so a DBA is included, the mailing and physical location, and then as I mentioned, the FEIN number has to be provided. And then if the insured does not have prior coverage, I recommend putting a future effective date, just so we don't have to keep revising the quote, but we can work off of a future effective date. And then going to the next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, the full name of the contact. So phone number, first and last name, and also email must be listed. Please make sure to include ownership information and percentage of ownership. This is important because I need to know which exclusion form the insured needs to complete prior to binding. And I'll go over in the case study a little bit more about those exclusions. And then the rating information. First thing, if they have multiple locations, you have to make sure you include those locations and include the payroll per location. Sometimes I get Accord apps where all the payroll is just lumped into the first location when they have 3 or 4 locations, so we have to have that split out. And then here you'll just include the classification, the duties the employees are performing, and then full-time versus part-time, and the estimated annual payroll. And then the next slide, we'll go on the last part. So this, you can include any prior carrier information. Also, here's a great place to put the annual premium, so I know, what they were based on the prior year or a target premium. And then also description of operations. This can be brief if the risk doesn't include a lot of exposure, but just make sure to include information that would be useful for me to underwrite. So for example, the years of experience, loss information, and their business operations, of course. And then I didn't put on this webinar, page 3 and 4 of the Acord app, but those are just simple yes, no questions that have to be completed. So everything highlighted is what I need to quote coverage, and if I receive an Acord like this, normally I can have a quote back to you the next day. Of course, depending on the risk and the premium, if it's higher premium, it might take a little bit longer, but if I have all the information, I can submit it right away.
Question for you, Lexi. If we don't have an effective date, what is a fair expectation for quote turnaround with a complete submission?
So if you don't have an exact effective date, if they're a new venture, I would just put on the Acord application an effective date the next week. But as I mentioned, if I have everything on the Acord application, I can most likely get you a quote the next day. And when we bind coverage, we would just tell the underwriter, please bind effective, this date. So if you put it for a future, just 1 week, then that would be helpful. Okay, so small business submissions. So small policies are easier to manage than your large accounts. We can do faster quotes because most of the time they're automatic quotes. They don't have to be unwritten as much because you're not dealing with many class codes or a lot of payroll. The employee count is normally low. So one thing to note is that payment options might be limited depending on premium size, but these are more of your mainstream America policies. As I mentioned, most of the time we can get a quote the same day or the next day. So something also to consider is you're not going to get carrier services that larger policies would get. So with smaller policies, you're not going to get those claims management or loss control just because they don't have the exposure to warrant it. So that's something to know. Also, definitely it depends on the carrier, but there is a lot of time payroll minimums or, for example, employee count minimum. So, for example, we have one carrier that actually requires at least one full-time employee. So this is something that you'll need to consider because the business might not have the qualifications, the minimum qualifications in order to qualify for the carrier. And then moving into our first case study. So here's a small business submission. This is a contractor under the name The Best Plumbing, LLC. So I'm going to walk you through this account. I'll let you know how I approached it, how I underwrote it as well. So as I mentioned, we have the name insured, Best Plumbing, LLC. The entity is not listed, but based off of the name, you can tell it's an LLC. So with that in mind, they have 2 managing members that have to be excluded from coverage. So it's, as I mentioned, it's very important to determine the entity type. So you know how many owners or managing members need to be excluded from coverage, and then you get those exclusion forms from the carrier prior to binding. And I say prior because the carrier will not backdate owner exclusions. So that's very important. And I only mention that because, for example, a sole proprietor versus a corporation, they have a different set of rules. So you should confirm with your insured prior to submitting. And then we have one location, which is in Arizona. As I mentioned, make sure to list all locations. This being a contractor, they may have employees going to job sites, but they are not permanently going to those job sites for the entire year, 5 days a week. So only the business location needs to be listed. But for example, let's say you have a maintenance employee that is going to a location every day, 5 days a week, then you'll want to add that location to the policy in case an injury occurs. Employee count, we have 6 full-time, 1 part-time. This business is not experience rated. That is because the experience modification, it's controlled by the Workers' Comp Rating Bureau. So they administrate this program and have a minimum criteria that drives the mod. So this business in particular, they don't meet the criteria, but maybe someday as their company grows, they will. And then their payroll has 2 class codes. So 5183 is the standard plumbing, and then 8810 is your clerical office classification. So they have payroll in both, and then you can see the premium is, mid 8,620. So this is a new venture, which is acceptable for all our carriers. Most do require industry experience, so that's why I put this here, 10 years of industry experience. Also, the underwriter may ask, some questions. Do they work below ground? Do they go over 15 feet? Do they work on commercial or residential, and what is the percentage? One common question is, do they hire subcontractors, and typically, what is the percentage of that? So these are just some typical questions that might get asked, but this is something you'll want to gather when you do your initial, meet and greet with your insured. And then now we're going to move on to the larger business submission. Okay, so here we have name insured under Olive Canyon Estates HOA. This risk has 2 locations in Pasadena, which location should be taken into consideration because the rate per class code can fluctuate depending on the territory of where the business is located. Los Angeles, for example, unfortunately is a higher rated territory. So here they have 16 employees, which is a large amount. And then their experience mod is at 124, which, I've seen much higher, but we can conclude that maybe they're being penalized from claims activity. But this also means that because it's over that 100%, they're going to have a 24% debit on their policy or on their quote. So for underwriting review, obviously I would need loss history for current value loss history, at least for the last 3 years. And then here they only have one classification, which is a typical HOA, class code 9066. And then their premium is around $42,000. So this is a HOA, as I mentioned. They've had 9 years of insurance coverage since 2012. And then if we go to the next slide, I'll cover more details on this risk. Okay. So I know Anae mentioned this earlier, but if you want to play in the big arena, you have to be on your game. Know the details of the risk. It will create a much smoother underwriting process, and in return, you'll receive a quote in a timely manner. So upon my review, I had to ensure we had all the proper documentation in order for me to quote the risk. So loss history was a priority due to the experience mod. I found out they had 9 claims within the last 5 years, and all were closed, which is something the underwriter will look for. If you have a huge claim that is still open, that is going to look unfavorable to an underwriter. And then they have a total incurred loss of $154,941. So also they've been with 2 carriers in the past, so I might ask the question, why are they marketing to another carrier? Were they non-renewed due to their claims activity, or is it just premium driven? Are they looking for a lower premium? So that's something important to include on the application just to provide more information. And then on a larger submission like this, I just put my requirements. I would require loss history, a supplemental application, an XMOD worksheet if the underwriter asks, and then also, of course, a completed Acord application. When you run into these larger submissions with a lot of claims, it would be helpful also to have a conversation with the insured and also include it on the application. Why are these claims occurring? Has the insured put any safety measures into place since the claims have happened? The carrier is most likely going to come back and ask that question anyway, so just gather the information. And then if you have a good submission, meaning complete submission, then we will submit to our markets right away. And most larger accounts like this, they most likely would be referred to underwriting management for review. So it's important just to have all the correct information straight up on the front side so that we don't have to keep going back to the underwriter for payroll changes or information that's missing. And then we do hold great relationships with our carriers. We're able to negotiate with our underwriters and getting a good competitive premium. So overall result, we were able to quote within 4 days, and then which is very good, especially because it's a large account, and then having everything we bound within 5. So moving on to the next slide. Okay, so larger business submissions. Your businesses that will qualify as a larger account are going to be possibly those higher risk accounts, more accidental exposure, potentially maybe higher rated class codes typically, which will result in a higher premium. A lot of what we see coming in the door is like manufacturing and contractors that can get into that larger state, or maybe they just have multiple locations. So mostly all the carriers we work with offer additional services for large accounts, such as loss control, claims management, and also many online resources such as safety videos, employee disclosures. So as I mentioned before, you won't have access to those with smaller accounts. So that's a benefit that larger accounts do have. But you always want to check with your underwriter. You can always ask me so you can promote those services to your client when you're presenting the proposal. And then when presenting the proposal to your client, obviously you need to make it very professional, present all the services and competitive placements for them. I always take it to multiple carriers that is within their appetite. So you'll want to present all of that to the insured and present a formal work comp proposal to your client. And we have proposal word templates on our website at cidinsurance.com that you can download and actually put your information in and send to your client. And Jacob will be sending those to you after the webinar, so those are very helpful to use. And then lastly, I just want to conclude with this is that a good complete submission, whether it's large or small, it can take the same amount of time and effort to underwrite. So the key is having that detailed submission, that completed Acord app, and maybe a supplemental just to get the process going smoothly. So now Darby will take over and present work comp renewals.
Good morning, everyone. So in this renewal case study, I'm going to be speaking on important underwriting information and the best strategies to retain workers' comp renewals. The most important strategy is systems being in place. They're the best way to manage your renewals. A method we use that other brokers can utilize is the 60-30-10 renewal process. So about 60 days out from the renewal date, we touch base and we gather updated information such as payroll, officer exclusions, location changes, and we begin to remarket the account to outside carriers for insureds that have larger premiums. At about 30 days, we send a renewal proposal to our brokers and then a reminder at 10 days. A broker's goal should be to retain about 90% of your renewals, and you can work off an expiration list to track those. CID has a renewal expiration port you can actually utilize on our website under broker tools. So at about 60 days, I'll print this out for myself. That way I can be aware of what's ahead for the coming month. So I want to touch briefly on policy audits because you need to remember that every policy is audited. From an underwriting perspective, audits are the biggest problem. They're mandated by the state, so the insured doesn't have a choice. And it's important to remember that when the policy renews, it's not done at that point. The insured will still need to complete an audit for the policy period. Make sure the insured complies with all of the requested audit documents so the audit isn't deemed non-compliant or receives an estimated premium. I also want to mention the importance of always having payroll up to date throughout the policy term. Policy changes and payroll changes, can happen at any time throughout the policy. So it's really important to make sure you're touching base with your insured because if there is a payroll change that isn't updated with the carrier, the audit's going to reflect the change and an additional premium may be due. So in this case study, I'm going to discuss some important factors to look out when managing your renewals and the impact that can unfold. I'll also discuss underwriting information when working your renewal book and maintaining the needs of each policyholder. So on this slide, our case study is going to be Prestige Hotel, LLC. This is a hotel with 19 employees, and it's been in business for about 9 years. So you can see on the slide, the entity is an LLC. That means the insured is going to need to provide completed exclusion forms for the owners if they want to be excluded. If you're coming up on a renewal term and the insured has already submitted exclusion forms, they do not need to complete new ones unless there's been a change in ownership, but at the time of the renewal, it's really important to confirm with the carrier that they do have the exclusion forms for the appropriate owners. They have one location located in Lathrop, California. So based on the location of any insured's business, they can receive a territorial rating. And as Lexi mentioned, businesses that are located in LA or Orange County, they are going to have higher territorial ratings. Their officers, there's 2 excluded, so the insured will need to submit 2 exclusion forms, one for each owner. And you can see their payroll, they have 2 class codes, one at 9050, that is hotel and motel employees at $240,000, and clerical office employees at 8810 for $80,000. So because they have a hotel and a clerical exposure, most carriers do have those class codes in their appetite. So for me, when I would be renewing this policy, I would also quote it with other carriers in order to find the insured the most competitive premium. As you can see, their X-mod is 107%. So because it's over 100, the insured will receive a 7% debit on their renewal policy, and due to their claims history. And their premium, as you can see, it's larger. So that's why I would be remarketing this to other carriers as well to find the insured that most competitive quote. So we'll move forward to the next slide.
I'm going to just stop for just a second. Darby, there was a question that came in. I think this might be one that Lexi was going to probably answer. What's the highest X-mod underwriting will consider? Lexi? Oh.
Okay, I'm so sorry. That's a great question. So the appetite can change, but most of our carriers, they accept up to 1.69. However, I have had accounts that have come in around, 183%, and I've submitted it to underwriting management, and it was approved. So when in doubt, you can always send it over to me, and I can just review the Acord application, go to our underwriters and see if they'll accept it and give you an answer. But also you want to provide kind of what I mentioned earlier about if they've put any safety measures into place, what are they doing to prevent claims? And at that point, we'll dive into the loss history too. Do they have open claims? What's going on with their company? But yes, we have had higher X-mods approved. So when in doubt, you can always come to me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, Darby.
Perfect. So when you're working your renewals, you need to be considering all changes in exposures. It's really important to touch base with your insured to gather any changes prior to the renewal. The best way to do this is having the insured update or complete a new Acord application so you have everything right in front of you. It makes the process so much easier. As I mentioned, 60 days out, CID will request an updated Acord application. That way, any changes that need to be made are done prior to the carrier releasing the quote. Because in the case we don't have updated information, the carrier will issue the renewal quote based on the payroll from the previous term. And if that payroll doesn't match the current business exposure, we'll have to go back to the carrier and get it updated. So it's just a lot of going back and forth, and having updated information from the beginning, it eases the process for the broker and it gets the quote to the insured quicker. Prestige Hotel LLC was a great example of an efficient renewal process. The broker provided our office with an updated Acord application when we requested it 60 days out. So we were actually able to update employee count and increase payroll for the renewal term, enabling us to provide an accurate quote from the get-go. So why is payroll so important? Payroll needs to be accurate during the policy because the insured is going to be audited at the end of it. For example, total payroll for Prestige Hotel was $320,000 with both class codes combined. Let's say this business grew during the policy period, increasing payroll to $700,000. However, if your broker is unaware at the time of the audit, the insured's going to owe additional premium. So it's much better for an endorsement to be issued midterm. So the additional premium, it will be divided into their installment plan rather than at the time of a final audit, the insured's owing $6,000 in premium. So the moral of the story is definitely check in with your insured every 3 to 4 months to see if there's been any payroll changes. Now on the right side of the slide, you'll see a screenshot that I included, and it's something I use and other brokers can utilize at the time of their insured's renewal. This is a risk summary report for the insured, and it's published on the California Rating Bureau. You can use the insured's FEIN number and access their experience modification history. So for Prestige Hotel LLC, they actually qualified for an experience mod this year, and it's 107, which means they had a claim in the past or two that raised their experience mod. So they're going to get that 7% debit on their renewal. Super important for the insured to understand what you're looking for in other markets to find a competitive carrier for them. For larger accounts, the goal at renewal is to present a few quotes to the insured in order to secure a bind. So keep questions in mind. What's the insured's target premium? Is your insured shopping their account to an outside agent? How do they feel about the terms presented to them? So communicate with your insured. That's the best way to get that bind. And then we'll move on to the last slide. So this is kind of a summary of everything we've been talking about, starting the new business renewal process early. So put in place a system that works best for you. And on the renewal side, and something I utilize, it's the 60-30-10 approach, or you can use the expiration spreadsheet, but ask them for their Acord application up front, have all the necessary information completed on the application, ask about officer exclusions, and ensure the client that CID and also you will present a competitive quote. Lexi and myself can help point you in the right direction or answer questions that you may be spending a lot of time on to figure out. So utilize our work comp team for competitive quotes. And know you're insured. Never assume you have a bind order. We're at the wholesale level, so we really encourage you to make sure you're working with your insured to get that bind. And by doing those follow-ups and check-ins, that's going to be what separates you from a non-renew or binding the account. So Anae, I'll give it over to you.
Great information. Wonderful job you guys did. There was one more question. Could you repeat the name of the website to check the XMOD again, please?
Yeah, it's the California Rating Bureau. Let me pull the link.
It's Connect.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. It's connect.wcirb.com.
And Jacob could include that in the email if you guys want to give that to him. Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us. I thought this was really valuable information. If you have additional questions, you can still type them in and we'll answer them. We'll get back to you with an answer. Make sure that you take a look at our website, cidinsurance.com. We've got lots of tools and the applications are there, and more about our webinars that are upcoming, and we have a lot of recorded ones on there as well. So you could take at your time, go and watch a webinar that could be helpful on coverage and or class of business type insurance. And then the girls are ready for your work comp applications today, so send them over to submissions at CID Insurance. You can also copy the underwriter as well. So we look forward to doing business with you. And for those of you that are already working with us, thank you so much for your business. Have a great day, everyone.